My second question to you is, what has been your greatest challenge in life?
My greatest challenge in life is probably my 4 ACLs. I think that the physical and the mental challenges that came with that were greater than what I'd probably anticipated, but also have prolonged much longer than what I would have anticipated at the time as well. And that's one where it constantly challenges you, and if you're not sort of in the right mind space or have the right people around you, then it absolutely can break you at times, and that's something that there's so much learning to come out of that. So I guess for me, going through, you do your first ACL and you sort of think, well, obviously I'm going to come back from this and that will be it. And at the time, 9 months worth of the rehab is pretty arduous and pretty difficult. And I guess then when you have a second and then a third, and in my case 4, I guess the continual setback is the thing that builds on you, and it's really difficult to stay positive through that and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think I've touched on this with mates in the past that have done ACLs, and I sort of asked them how do they find it and how actually do they go throughout the week. And most of them say, oh, look, I struggle a little bit during the week when the boys go to training where I'm watching them on the track. But most of the time I struggle on the weekend on a Saturday when I'm watching them play and I'm not out there. I'm not doing what I want to do. And I think what I touched on, that although I was very fortunate to be in the AFL and to have the best people around me, and that's ultimately what got me back from 4 ACLs, it also is a burden as well, because that is your life and that is your job. So I've mentioned to them that I struggle with it every single day, every minute of every day, because that was my full-time job. There was no escape. And the other thing with that is you're in the limelight, so people know who you are. And unfortunately, out of, I guess, just genuine care, you'll have random people come up to you all the time and ask how your knee's going. So they're only trying to do the right thing, but what it's actually in turn doing is it's bringing it up and making it front of mind for, I guess, for myself at the time. And that's where you really struggle to escape and put it to the side. So that probably was the greatest challenge. It just mentally to be challenged every single day and every single time you did it, and have to respond to that, and have such a, I guess, public life around it, and the scrutiny around it as well. It's amazing what emotions you go through. I guess some really highs, but then some really bad lows as well. And you do learn and develop a lot from it, but that's something that, would have absolutely, for a 4-year period, would have been one of the most challenging things I went through. And then I guess the other thing that I still am challenged to this day is that the impacts of doing 4 ACLs, and not as much mentally, but probably more physically, what that has had on my body, and the patience I've had to have with that, and the challenges I've had with that, which then spill over to be mental. And unfortunately, you battle with that, and at times wonder why you're not moving the way you want to, or why you're sore all the time. And that prolonged effect is probably something I didn't at the time expect to happen, but it's one that I've just had to learn to deal with and manage, and just be really patient with.
By prolonged effect, because I was obviously reading up, and sorry to hear about early last year you had a groin injury. Do you think something like a continuous injury like an ACL that you unfortunately had to have, does that alter and I suppose change the kind of the amount you rely on different parts of your body? You'll favour one leg a bit more than the other, or so and so. Could something like your struggles with your ACLs, unfortunately, do you reckon that contributes to, could contribute to things like your groin injury?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all coincides together. I think with me, it's something for probably 2 or 3 years post coming back from my 4 ACLs, I had groin soreness and other soreness in my body, and I wasn't 100% sure as to why that was there. I thought it might be to do with my knees, but probably didn't realise the actual impact that it had. And in compensating for, I guess, just deficiencies through my knees and through such a long time out, it did take a massive effect on my body, and in the end, I had a really bad, I guess, movement in my groin, which meant that every time I changed direction, every time I moved, I would have inflammation in my groin, and meant that for a couple of years, I genuinely couldn't train majority of the time, and if I did, I didn't have that power, and I wasn't able to push off because I'd have that instant pain. So it's one that the frustration there was that you try and train as much as your teammates, and you try and get back those 4 years that you've missed and show people what you can do, but then every single session you have to do that little bit less. And the mental battle I had with myself was I've always been a very driven individual, that I was always like, I'm going to do more when I can. I'm going to put the work in, and eventually it'll pay off. But for me, it meant that I actually wasn't able to train as much as what my teammates were, and that's something that over time you decondition, and it affects your game. And I really mentally struggled with that, because I then had to work out where the boundary was and how much I could push myself. And not just that, unfortunately, you have a lot of people around, you have players, you have coaches, they want you to do more and more and get back in and sort of train like a normal player. And the physios sort of need to have that chat that unfortunately that can't happen, and that's something that creates a bit of a divide as well at times. And there's a lot of challenges that you probably don't expect, and that's what just adds to it, I guess. And so it's one that, to be honest, I'm as happy as I've ever been with my body. I think that going through the 4 ACLs, I sort of pass on that anyone who does an ACL or has a really long-term injury that's going to affect them, it usually takes a year or so to get over that. And in my case, doing 4, I didn't think it'd take me 4 years to get over it, but it probably has in terms of the rest of my body. And I haven't injured my knees in more than 4 years now, and it does feel like I'm in my best condition and best shape I've ever been in, and don't actually have any pain in my body when I actually train nowadays, and I can train back-to-back sessions, which I've never really been able to do. So it's one that I knew I'd have to be patient. I probably didn't think it would take 4 or 5 years, but it does feel like that's what it's sort of taken.
Really well put, mate. And I liked what you said a little while ago. You talked about the part of struggling mentally with a setback and an obvious injury is people meaning well, trying to give you support, but really just bringing it up. And I draw back to episode 2 of my podcast. I interview my mentor, James Taylor, who unfortunately has had cancer battles for the last few years of his life, and he stresses over and over that he doesn't want to be known as the cancer guy. He doesn't want to be known as this is my one part of my identity, where when you're, especially I can only imagine for you, when you're in the spotlight and people mean well, but it often I feel like people would come across as you're the guy who got injured rather than yourself. Do you feel a bit like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That stigma's there, and it's there in good ways. It's also there in negative ways as well. And you sort of just, the quicker you get your head around that, I think the easier it becomes. Unfortunately, people don't do it in a negative way. They don't mean it that way at all. But that's sort of just how it's portrayed. And again, I touched on it. It's good and bad. You get a lot of nice messages, and in turn, I've been able to help a lot of people out who go through difficulties, whether it be mental health or whether it be injuries in sport, and that's something that I feel like I'm a little bit privileged that I'm able to pass on things that have helped me, and that's something that's the good of it. Then I guess the bad of it is that you get pigeonholed, unfortunately, that people believe you'll never be the athlete you want to be, and unfortunately you're always going to be injured, and that I've felt that a little bit the last few years with AFL clubs, and that's what people do, and unfortunately that's the nature of it, and you've sort of just got to accept that. But it's one that I think the more you battle with it yourself and mentally you get frustrated with why people do that, I think that's when you're going to really struggle. And so I sort of just go, okay, people are going to make up their own mind and have their own opinions. That's completely fine. I've just got to control what I can and hopefully change the narrative there.
Yeah,